Today's episode is brought to you by Sports Business Classroom. Landing a job in the NBA is no easy feat. One surefire way to put yourself in front of a competitive talent pool is if you master the collective bargaining agreement. And now you can, with a course developed by the godfather of the CBA himself, Larry Kuhn. Larry Kuhn has been teaching the CBA to teams, agents, media, and students for over 20 years, and now you can master the CBA through his online video on-demand course, which is now available to the public. If you're looking to break into basketball, or even just set yourself apart, this is the competitive advantage you are looking for. To learn more about the video on-demand course that is being taken by teams and agents all over the world, please visit sportsbusinessclassroom.com today. Welcome one and all to the NTC podcast. I'm here with Anil, Gogna, and Michael Grange to discuss a lot of really cool things with this NBA trade deadline, the Toronto Raptors, and Michael's amazing story. And we're really excited to get into it. We both are really excited to dive right into Michael's story and hear all about this season and all the amazing work that he's done.
Awesome. Thanks for having me in, guys. It's been fun watching your site. I use it quite a bit. And Anil and I, as fellow Canadians, we like to chat back and forth, and you guys are a really good source of info and insight. So happy to be on with you.
Yeah, awesome, man. Thanks for joining us as always, Mike. It's a pleasure to connect, and I love reading all of the work that you put out as well.
Thank you.
Awesome. So to start off this show, before we dive into all the current stuff with the Raptors, Mike, we wanted to ask you kind of your origin story and how you really got into this business, really kind of chasing your passion of being around the game and kind of letting basketball be your life in a sense.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I got into the business. I was a newspaper reporter. I worked at a newspaper here called the Globe and Mail, which is a very prestigious paper. And I kind of stumbled into sports a little bit. I was always a huge fan, had played a ton of basketball at a fairly high level here. And so, but I didn't set out to be a sports writer or be a basketball writer. But when I began at the Globe, this would be in the mid 90s. Of course, the Raptors had just started the expansion franchise, which is in its first year. And I was pretty well positioned at that point as somebody who really did understand the game quite a bit and had a big passion for it. So when I kind of moved up a little bit in seniority, I got some opportunities to cover the team, and it really became almost a full-time thing. I would, in around 2000, probably even maybe 1998, I covered the NBA Finals that year. And it's been sort of central to what I do. I've done a lot of other things in sports. And then, but basketball has always been sort of an area of expertise. I developed, some recognition around. And then when I moved to SportsNet, which is for American audiences, is a little bit like ESPN in that, we have a really vibrant website for written material. We have sports radio. We have multiple sports television channels. And so when I moved over in 2011, I believe my role expanded. I eventually became part of the Raptors broadcast team and continued writing and reporting on basketball and the Raptors specifically. So it's been a great fit. I always like to tell people, the Raptors certainly have had a huge impact on the growth of basketball in Toronto, in Canada. You could never underestimate it. But at the same time, the passion for basketball, the basketball scene that was in existence, certainly in Toronto, and I know in many other places across Canada. I played my college basketball in Atlantic, Canada, and there was a really, really passionate basketball group community there. College basketball out there was giant. And I know it was true. There's pockets of that all over the country. And in particular, when I grew up, the high school scene in Toronto was bananas. And just a little bit of background is Ontario, which is the province I live in, and I know there's American listeners, used to go to high school to grade 13. There was 5 years of post-secondary. And so right away, you had kids who were 19 years old, sometimes 20 in their last year of high school. And it was very common for kids to take a sixth year victory lap, they would call it. And so you had guys who were 20 years old, sometimes even 21, playing high school basketball. And there were very, very few Canadians would go and play in the US. Certainly none in college. Like there was a handful, like Leo Routens. There's a very small number, one or two a year kind of. And they were super talented guys, usually big men. And around that same time, nobody was going to play high school and play basketball in the States for high school. It's become very, very common now. All the Canadian players quite often leave around grade 9 or grade 10. Anyway, but so you had this pocket in Toronto, which is a very big city, very multi-ethnic city, very diverse, and it was kind of captured. There was nowhere for all this talent to go. There wasn't really even an AAU scene back then. In fact, there wasn't an AAU scene back then. And so for about probably a 15-year period, you had this combination of factors. So you had all this incredible talent. There was nowhere else for it to go to play. High school basketball was the scene. You had a whole bunch of tournaments that were signature tournaments. There was just incredible competition, incredible size, incredible athleticism. And a lot of the players that you see, Canadians that are kind of this wave of Canadian talent that's kind of washed over the NBA the last 10 years or so, a lot of their dads were playing in this high school scene I'm talking about. And so I always like to mention that because it's like, it wasn't like we just showed up. Like there's been a ton of Canadian talent in Toronto, particularly, and across Canada, especially as well. So that's my little history lesson. And to bring it full circle, being in those gyms, playing in some of those gyms, playing in some of those tournaments, watching them. I mean, it was like if you were around and you were part of that, you became a basketball fan. You just could not. It was just so electric.
I really appreciate the history lesson as an American, really not knowing a lot of those things about all these tournaments and all those kind of ways that basketball kind of took shape in Canada over the last few decades. But I mean, in terms of your reporting, you mentioned obviously going to all these games and seeing them. What were you maybe writing about? What were you always maybe around, especially then transitioning over to the Raptors, maybe covering them for a little bit? What did your career look like in kind of covering all this great Canadian basketball that a lot of us Americans didn't even know existed until you just said it?
Yeah, again, timing is everything, right? So it was really cool to get a chance to cover the NBA and cover an expansion team from the ground up. And I learned a ton, and it was the early years of the Raptors were very chaotic. There was ownership struggles and financial issues and arena issues and all of that. And so it was, there was a lot of news reporting. There was a lot of explosive stories going on. So to be in the middle of that was, as a pretty young in my career, was really cool and very exciting. And then the other thing I spent a lot of energy on, because it was a passion, was kind of really reporting and I don't want to say exposing, but giving voice to maybe the Canadian basketball community that I knew was there. And so, when I got a chance and Canadian kids started going to play in high school and the AAU scene was kind of coming up, I always try to find time to write about Canadians who are playing D1 or Canadians who were kind of the early days of them leaving Toronto to go play in high school, the prep school scene, which was a little chaotic. There was some pretty interesting moments during that. But as an example, one of the favorite stories I ever did was when Tristan Thompson and Corey Joseph were playing in Las Vegas at Findlay Prep. That's right, at Findlay Prep. And, going down, it was kind of unheard of at the time. And as two Canadian kids playing in this high school in Las Vegas, it was not something that was typically done. They were right at the early wave of that. And, Tristan was already getting some excitement as a potential first round pick, and Corey was getting a lot of buzz too. And so just going down and seeing how that element of the industry, I guess, was taking shape and how Canadians were finding a place in it was really fun too.
That's awesome. Mike, you've obviously been around the game for a while now, so that's why we appreciate getting your perspective on things. I think it's pretty cool as well, being a Canadian myself, as trying to break into the business, a lot of people feel like if you're going to get an opportunity, you may have to make the move over to the US, depending on what you get into. So I think it's pretty cool that you get to cover your local team of the Toronto Raptors. We wanted to ask you some questions related to the Raptors, but before we talk about this season, I wanted to take a minute to just reflect on the past. In 2019, against all odds, the Raptors they made the ultimate gamble, made that trade DeRozan for Kawhi, and it paid off with the city's first championship. What do you remember from that run, and do you have any memorable stories from that year?
What don't I remember? I mean, I remember everything. Well, that's probably not true, but I have a lot of memories. I remember the night that the trade went down, and the Raptors traded DeMar DeRozan for Kawhi Leonard, and that just seemed really risky. It seemed really risky. I think people don't appreciate or maybe have forgotten. Kawhi was coming off a year where he didn't play. He was kind of a disgruntled player with a high-end organization, and it seemed the Raptors were a 59-win team, and DeMar DeRozan was maybe the most beloved player in franchise history. So it was not there was no guarantees, and that just kind of set everything rolling, and everything about that season was intense. We didn't know when Kawhi was going to play, how long load management would last, what the situation was. It was supposed to be a temporary thing, and being a full season thing. I remember traveling with the team before the trade deadline, and there was some suggestion that Kyle Lowry might end up getting traded, because it wasn't clear how committed, like the chemistry at that moment on that team wasn't all that great. Part of it was to do with Kawhi, and they just couldn't know if they would rely on him and things like that. And then that kind of got smoothed over. And then being in Atlanta when they traded Jonas Valanciunas for Marc Gasol, which was another kind of pretty big gamble. Gasol is obviously a very special player, but the Raptors, I think they were 20-4 when Valanciunas got hurt, playing against Golden State, a game they went on to win. And so it wasn't like, it was a pretty bold move at the time. DeLon Wright was a good player too. So I remember that. I remember where I was when Kawhi Leonard's shot went in against Philadelphia, and just kind of, I'll always never forget the pause, right? The ball just got out of his fingers. Like, it was not like the red light didn't come on when the ball hit the rim. Like, the red light came on like the second it left his fingers. It barely got it off. And so when you count that time from when the ball went through the air, hit the rim, bounced 4 times, it's about 4 seconds, I think. And
that's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. And I remember our broadcast position was kind of kitty corner to that in the arena. And so the ball goes in the air and the light comes on. And I remember sitting there going, like, what the hell's going on? Like, the game's over. And then eventually you realize the ball was still on the rim, and it goes in, and the place just, like, it was silence, right? There was not a sound in that building. And then people just lose their minds. That was pretty wild. And I remember when they eliminated the Bucks in Game 6, and it was just clear they were going to go to the NBA Finals. And to go back to my comments off the top, it really was a very special full circle moment. And the Raptors have a very unique place in sports, I would argue, even amongst every NBA market. Every franchise is very special to their city, and there's always a cultural kind of connection that the successful franchises have, and it builds up over time. But I think what's a little bit special about the Raptors is, again, for maybe an audience that isn't so familiar, the face of Canada, the face of Toronto has really changed in the last 25 years, let's say, even more probably. And like a lot of those guys I was, playing with during, in the 80s and 90s, like, that was just kind of the front end of a wave of multiculturalism that was affecting the city, and not just Toronto, but other major urban areas in Toronto or in Canada. And so, and so I think the Raptors really became a cultural force within that community because, the kind of, I think the sport spoke to them a little more. It was more accessible. It was more familiar. Maybe if you're coming over from China or other parts of the world, certain parts of Africa, like the sports maybe that you bring with you, or maybe football, like soccer and basketball. They're maybe more your touchstone sports or things that are familiar to you from home. And I'm generalizing, of course, but and so I think in that context, as Toronto, as the Raptors as an NBA franchise really began to speak to a growing group of people. And then I think the championship was an opportunity for, a lot of people, maybe, it was an expression of them. Like it really felt like not an end of something, but the beginning of something. And I think the next 25 years in Toronto are going to be much different than the last 25 years. I think the Raptors are going to be part of that story. They're going to be woven in with that story. And so when you have a parade and you have, I'm still not sure what the official numbers are. I don't know, I heard like 1 million, 3 million. I don't know. All I know is there was not anywhere to move in downtown Toronto, and the passion that was there, the faces that were there, the people that were there, what it meant to them to be a part of it was, I don't know if we'll ever see something like that again. And again, like, I'm not suggesting that other teams and other cities aren't part of the fabric of where they're from. All the good ones are like that, but I just think in Toronto, it's just a little bit different. And then I think, again, because it's the only Canadian team, that whole "We the North" thing, like, that's not a marketing slogan. That's like a lifestyle. And when people, Canadians, like, we love Americans, but we love, we revel in the fact that Americans sometimes don't fully appreciate us. And so when we get a chance to kind of sing our praises, and the Raptors were certainly a vehicle for that, it kind of hits a little different. So it was a really special moment for sure.
I love that. I love how you summed it all up. Being from Toronto, born and raised, I feel a lot of the same sentiments that you kind of expressed there. I remember at the beginning of the season when they made that trade, and then the first thing that came out was Kawhi doesn't want to come to Toronto. And I think a lot of people were like, oh my God, again, like, players in the past, we've heard that before. But it's crazy because Toronto had the reputation of, they have a ceiling. They can't get past LeBron. It was being called LeBronto. And now I feel like because the Raptors did break through, they don't have that same label anymore. Now, when the team is starting to do well, it's like, what's the ceiling of this team? So as we shift to present times, and let's talk about the current season, because the Raptors started this season a little slow out of the gate, missing Siakam, the missing OG, the missing Gary Trent Jr., but things have quickly changed. The Raptors just played 19 games in the last 34 days. They've gone 13-6 and 7-4 against teams over 500. And how they're doing it, they're extremely versatile, playing a ton of wing players, and they're riding their best players. In that stretch, all 5 of their starters are averaging over 35 minutes a game, and Siakam and Fred are up around 40. So, but I don't know if this is sustainable. So you tell me, what do you see as the ceiling for this team, both this year and in the future?
Yeah, great questions. I think, I don't think it's sustainable, right? Like, I think, if you're going to play your 5 starters, if you could play them 48 minutes a game, yeah, of course you're going to do better. Presumably your starters are better than the other team's bench. But, I don't think you can get away with that. Not just from the fatigue factor. I think, I trust these guys athletically. I trust their health and, their sports science and performance people. Like, I don't think no one's being abused here, but, I think really what you're risking is the more minutes you play, the more likely something's going to happen. You're going to step on someone's foot or tweak a hamstring or get run over, right? There's just that many more incidents, so chances of those 5 guys never getting hurt are slim. And I do think that there are minutes when those guys aren't on the floor, and you got to try and win those minutes too. So I guess what I'm really getting at is I think their core group, I think, has maybe exceeded expectations. I think even man by man, you go through them. I think Fred VanVleet's probably been better than most would have thought in his first year playing without Kyle Lowry. He's an all-star, and he might end up being all NBA. So I think he's probably ahead of expectation. I think Pascal Siakam was a huge question mark for all kinds of reasons. And if you go back to, say, December 1, he's been the top 10 player in the league. Like, he's just been unbelievable. He's playing the best he's ever played. And so that's kind of above what people were expecting. I think OG Anunoby is probably a little bit ahead of what people thought. And really, he's doing that. He hasn't really had those, he hasn't shot the ball from 3 as well as he typically has. And he's still being a highly productive offensive player. So I think there's still a lot of enthusiasm there. Gary Trent, I think, as well, has kind of blown past people's expectation. And Scotty Barnes is, I think, better than anyone thought he would be. Even people who were high on him didn't think he'd be this effective. So I think in there, and then I would even go down to Chris Boucher's been he's really figured out a role to play. Precious Achua, even, he's showing glimmers that certainly weren't there early in the season. And so, so I think they really like that. And, but they need more, right? Like, there's a reason Nick Nurse is playing his starters 40 minutes a night. It's because he doesn't trust what he has when they're not in the game. So I think if you can, augment what you have, I think you become a good team. I think you become a team that can win a playoff round. And to me, they kind of profile like a team that's, if you could add a superstar to this group, I think they'd be really, really good. But so I don't know, when you say ceiling, I mean, does it look like a team that can win a title to me? I'd be surprised. But I think what they do have here in Toronto is there is a cultural thing that's real. And when you look at organizations that are consistently successful, I think they do develop habits of being a team. And I think we've seen in the NBA that those, you can't take that for granted. Just as an example, like, you have a guy like James Harden who forced his way out of a handpick situation in Houston, forced his way into Brooklyn. Now it looks like he's got his finger on the trigger in Brooklyn. And, that's his, so like, you ask yourself, as good as those players are, and they're very good, they're amazing. Like, one thing I learned watching a team build towards a championship is how difficult it is, and how much resilience you need to have, and how much kind of commitment and those connecting tissues have to be so tight and so it really does matter. And you look at the Milwaukee Bucks, for example, and how hard it was for Giannis to win his first title, how many times they failed him and Chris Middleton, even Drew Holiday, and yet they stuck with it, and they won it. And I think the one thing that Toronto has in its favor is they've seen how important that connective tissue is. And there's people in that room, in that organization, who understand it and value it. So I think they're always going to be a team that can punch ahead of its weight or above its weight. But so I think what they're doing now is sustainable. I think they're going to be good, but how they get from here to a championship team, I don't know.
And you mentioned so many players there, so many, right, that are contributing and playing their role and figuring things out. And the coming months or years going to be very telling as to how that all plays out. But one of the guys you mentioned, Fred VanVleet, I mean, just last week was named an all-star, and he's the 5th player ever to do that after being undrafted. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, what your reaction was to that, and how how you've seen him develop over the last few seasons.
He's really developed, and I've watched Fred all the way up, and I didn't predict this of him. I kind of really wondered how he was going to end up being an effective NBA guard. He just really struggled to finish, and yet, you talk about people who have. First of all, when he was named All-Star, like, it was so sad that there was no one in the building that night because the COVID restrictions we still have here, because the place would have gone bananas. And the same thing I've said about the way the Raptors connect with the fabric of the city. Fred VanVleet is maybe the ultimate expression of that. Like, he's somebody that everyone in this city loves, whether a basketball fan or not. Every Raptors fan loves him. If he's not their favorite player, he's their second favorite player. And it's because he's just got this incredible combination of on-court ability that he's developed. He's kind of worked on his weaknesses, extended his shooting range, improved as a finisher. He's always been a great defender. He's just incredibly tough. The more you watch him, you just cannot believe how much risk he takes to play the level of defense in particular he plays. And this town loves him for it. And the building would have exploded had, when he got that announcement, Freddie VanVleet All-Star. I think it's really important to him because he understands what he represents. He knows that, a lot of people like the underdog label. You'll get guys who are lottery picks talking to themselves about being underdogs. You're like, dude, you're 6'8", 210. Like, what are you talking about? But, but Fred truly is. He's, by NBA standards, an absolute underdog. And, he understands that narrative is something that is very powerful to people. People really can relate to it. And so for him to kind of get that accolade on top of everything else he's achieved, I think is, a chapter in the story in his book that he's happy to have. So it wasn't one of those ones where he's like, well, these things don't matter to me. It really did matter to Fred because he knows how unlikely it was and how meaningful it is for other people.
Yeah, I think it's such an awesome story. You see people around the whole association, not just affiliated with Toronto, but just around the whole sports world, like talking about how unlikely it was and what a cool story it is. So I think it's awesome to see. Michael, we were talking a little bit about the team that the Raptors have right now. They're obviously riding their starters a lot. There's some clear gaps that the team has, and they have an opportunity to change that at the trade deadline, which is on Thursday, just a couple of days out. From my perspective, I see a couple of key priorities. One, obviously, they need to stay under the luxury tax. They're about $250,000 under that line. Number two, if they can move Goran Dragic, you've written about this recently quite a bit. And then number three is deciding on whether Chris Boucher is a part of the future or not. And if he's not, then maybe trying to get some value for him now. What do you think the future holds for Dragic and Boucher? And what do you think, or what do you want to see Toronto do at the deadline?
Yeah, great. That sums it up really well. I'll be pretty stunned if they don't make a move on Thursday, and 100% Dragic is the value of that contract. That's why they've held on to him. And I think as a front office, they've taken a fair bit of heat, right? Because you trade your franchise player, Kyle Lowry, and you get back Precious Achiuwa, and then a guy who shows up and asks to leave, basically, is what happened. And, there are some reasons behind that. The front office isn't in a situation they can really disclose sort of that backstory. And, but the optics of it haven't been great for them. So, but all that said, the reason he's been maintained as an asset, so to speak, is that 19.4 million is, I think, the second highest, of tradable, of expiring contracts that are realistically going to be traded. It's the second highest behind Gary Harris's. And obviously, Orlando is not a team that's going to be in the business of sending out a pick to get a player at this stage. So I think it really positions the Raptors well if they want to add a pick. And I'm pretty confident that that's what I'm going to say, I know that's what they're willing to do. A first round pick, all of a sudden, that's a pretty interesting package. And you can almost look at this as the start of their offseason, where they can kind of take an asset who's not on their roster right now, take a first round pick who isn't on the roster right now, and turn that into some player or players that, have some contract value next year, maybe the year after, that fit in with their needs. So I think that's the way they're approaching it. As it relates to, so again, I'll be shocked if they don't take advantage of that. And it would be, to my mind, it would be a mistake. It would be an error on their part if they don't find a way to take advantage of what's a free swing, basically, at building the roster. Chris Boucher is an interesting case. He's expiring. He got off to a horrible start, but he's kind of speaks about it. He had a really interesting experience where, he last year he popped offensively. He had career highs across the board. He was one of the great stories around the league, and the Raptors looked like geniuses for signing him for a 2-year deal at around $14 million. And then, like any good player, right? Like he was very ambitious and he wanted to grow his game, and he put a lot of time into working on his ball handling, looking at, kind of working on attacking closeouts, shooting off the dribble, good for him, right? And then the season starts and he tries to kind of apply these in games, and it really wasn't working. And it really was affecting his effectiveness in other roles defensively, as kind of as a high energy type player. And it was looking pretty grim. And then amazingly, when the Raptors got hit by COVID, they played in Cleveland with 4 replacement players and 4 regular roster players, one of whom was Chris. And Chris was even Chris was like the most senior of the 4 existing players. The other guys were all some of the rookie guys. And so Chris kind of took it upon himself to be, the go-to guy for that game. And guess what? He was miserable. He was terrible. It was pretty embarrassing, actually. It was like watching the guy at a pickup game try to do, it just didn't work. And he said, like, it was a humbling experience for him. He kind of recognized how difficult that role is for players to play, even in that circumstance. And he said, basically from that game on, he just said, you know what, I'm going to do the 3 things I'm really good at. I'm going to, run rim to rim. He's talked about being a Dennis Rodman, just being a maniac on the offensive glass, and kind of just bringing energy into every possession, regardless if he shoots or not. And he's turned his season around to the point where that I would be a little bit surprised if the Raptors include him in any deal, unless it's a really, really good deal, because I think they have his bird rights. I think they value what he brings. He's kind of a unique player, and he would be difficult to replace, I think, in free agency. And I would also say that, I'm not sure with the amount of mid-level money out there next year, I should say, like, he's a player that I think wouldn't command more than the mid-level. So it's not like a team is going to give you a ton for his bird rights. So it would really only be a salary matching type maneuver. And, I'd be a little bit surprised if they let him go.
Definitely, and there's been a lot in that on top of the Raptors, where there's been kind of moves all over the league that we've been, whether recent moves or moves that we're expecting, that we've all been really on top of. And one of them being, of course, the Clippers trade with the Trailblazers, and then, of course, the Cleveland trade just now yesterday with Indiana. And we're curious about your thoughts on either one of those, because there's a lot of, whether it's with the Clippers trade, of course, people really siding in one direction. And then, of course, with the Cleveland trade, it's a little bit more people understanding maybe what both organizations, kind of what direction they're going in. And we're curious what your thoughts were on those.
Yeah, both were really interesting. It's interesting the timing that they happened so soon. I think what it says about the Clippers, it was funny. I kind of was wondering and asking around if, the Clippers might be looking to get off some of their money and save themselves money under the tax, given they're probably not going to be that competitive this year. And, would a team like the Raptors be able to, pick up a Luke Kennard or something like that? And when I kept asking around, people were like, no, Steve Ballmer's worth $94 billion. He does not care about the luxury tax. And sure enough, he goes and makes a really good trade for his team, right? Like, for basically the cost of a 2nd round pick. He gets Norm Powell, who's, I don't think people appreciate, like, he's been a better 3-point shooter the last 3 years than Duncan Robinson. Like, he is an elite 3-point shooter, like one of the very best in the league, like right up with Joe Harris type stuff. And so they get him, and they get and they get Covington, who's proven to be a super effective role player in all kinds of lineups. So they're in good position if they get either Paul George or Kawhi back this season. And I think next season you can project as the Clippers being really, really good if they're healthy. So kudos to Steve Ballmer, right? Like it's only going to cost an extra $30 million plus whatever it's going to cost all those years they have Norm, but good for him. And then, so a little bit of a surprising move from underwhelming move, I guess, by Portland. I think there's probably more moves there coming, but, I guess that billionaire being Paul Allen's sister, I guess she didn't want to spend on the luxury tax. I don't know. But, I think on the Cleveland front, I think from the Raptors point of view, I would say it's pretty encouraging that Cleveland made that move and made it when they did. I don't think Karis LeVert was a player they were targeting. But I think Cleveland and Toronto were sort of looking for similar players, at least if Toronto was, in terms of they need backcourt playmaking among other things they need. And, you kind of looked at what Cleveland could throw in a deal, and they could compete with Toronto for a lot of potential players out there, right? Because they had Rubio's expiring. They had all their picks. They had some additional second round picks. And, so I think they would have potentially been competing for some of the same deals. So with Cleveland making that move, I think it opens the marketplace up in Toronto's favor a little bit. There'll be one less team, I think, that could be in on some of the same players that the Raptors would be pursuing.
And fascinating stuff we're thinking about those two trades. And I mean, in terms of, there's some other teams right at the top of the East, or even the West, that are looking to either make moves or have been surprising so far this season, right? Just being high up in the standings. Cleveland comes to mind. We just mentioned them. Chicago, teams like that. Who are you maybe most surprised from on that front in terms of teams that really climb the standings in such a quick time, in less than a year almost?
Well, you named two of them, right? And and I think I think it says a lot, right? Like, I mean, Evan Mobley is clearly, they're clearly a very, very special player. Like every kind of lineup data you look at, he's impacting that team, defensively, particularly. The only time they struggled was when he was out of the lineup, and they've been through their share of injuries. So it just goes to show why Evan Mobley was a guy, I think, had he been available, I think the Raptors probably would have drafted him. I think they're very happy they got Scotty Barnes, but I think so. Cleveland is a team that is really positioned now and in the future to be a really good team. And then Chicago, like, I'm very happy to see them do well. DeMar DeRozan's a guy I covered a lot, and you're not going to meet a more quality person in the NBA. And to see him, I think people really slept on him when he was in San Antonio. Like, he was just putting up some incredible numbers there, 7-8 assists a game, and still a very dangerous scorer. So to kind of have both elements of his game come together, and then with the other moves they made, I think Chicago is probably a little more dangerous than people realize. I think if they can get healthy, that's a lot of firepower they have. I think they're going to be at least adequate defensively, especially if they get Pat Williams back. So you have Pat Williams, Lonzo Ball, and Alex Caruso. That's three really good switchable defenders, right? So I think they're probably a little tougher than most people think. And I think that said, I think when I look at the East, the team, it's kind of funny because I've seen the Raptors beat them twice now in the space of a week, but I really think Miami is there. I think they're very dangerous. I think they could be a team that wins it. They just have so much depth, so much shooting, so much toughness, so much IQ. And, when you have guys like Jimmy Butler and PJ Tucker and Kyle Lowry, not to mention, of course, Bam Adebayo, but the guys like that, again, going back to my experience watching the Raptors win a title, you can't underestimate it. Like, they're tough. They can, and I think even just as important as being tough is the level of IQ it takes and cohesion it takes to make the kind of defensive adjustments that winning teams make at the highest level of the postseason, play by play, possession by possession. You can't quantify it. And, the kind of element of the Raptors title that really has stuck with me was how smart that team was. And if you go Marc Gasol, Kyle Lowry, Kawhi Leonard, Fred VanVleet, and then Pascal Siakam was kind of young in his career, but he had the guidance of those guys. Danny Green, like those guys are like basketball savants. They're so experienced. They've seen so many things. And so they could literally take defensive adjustments from a timeout, let alone a shoot around. They could take them from a timeout and completely revamp what they were going to do defensively on any possession, any quarter, based on personnel, based on what was happening in a game. And, you kind of look at the landscape and, clearly Milwaukee has those qualities, but Miami has, a lot of those type of guys. And so I think that's why they could be a team to reckon with.
Yeah, I think it's a fun year because so many surprise teams are doing much better than we expected. And with that ascent from teams like a Chicago and a Cleveland, it ends up pushing some of the other teams that we thought were going to be a little bit better a bit further down. And the Raptors are starting to become in that group of, oh, they're doing better than we thought they were going to be. But of the teams that are below Toronto, ignoring Brooklyn, which of the other ones do you think are the biggest threat to make a run? We got Boston, we got Charlotte, we got Atlanta, Washington, New York. Any of those stand out to you?
The East is just so good. It's so deep. And, you take a team like New York, and we talk about chemistry and cohesion. That's really the only difference, right, from this year to last year. Maybe a little bit of defensive toughness too. And, it looks like they're going to be a lottery team. They're going to go from coming within a game of going to the second round to being, they'll be in the lottery again. So I think of those teams, I think you got to go with Atlanta, right? Like they're really good. They have a ton of players. I think the way that some of their young guys are coming on, and they have so much depth. So I think that they're well positioned to kind of go on a run here, and they should emerge. But they're really digging a hole for themselves. So they're kind of like the opposite from Toronto, right, where they have like 10 guys, it seems, who could start for teams, and and yet somehow it hasn't all translated into winning quite yet. And I think that's a problem when you have a young team. Like there's a lot of stuff kind of needs to get worked out, right? And kind of a pecking order needs to be established, and it's not always easy sailing. But I think based on talent and the kind of the length of their lineup, like just 1 through 9, 1 through 10, how many different ways they can score and attack, and when they commit a little bit defensively, they're pretty good.
Yeah, we talk about like the teams, and it's such an open year, not just for the teams, but also in the MVP race. When we looked at it after 20 games, I think there's a straw poll, I think Tim Bontemps does. And after, I think it was 20 games, Steph Curry was like far and away the favorite.
He was I was part of that straw poll. Yeah, he was unanimous. And
unanimous.
Yeah, well, because I think he had just finished, like he had I remember quite well, because I think because the Raptors played in Golden State, and I remember writing about Steph Curry, and I think he had there's some kind of weird number where like there have been 10 games ever where a guy had 9 threes in a game or something, and Steph had 6 of them, and 2 of them had been in the past week. So anyway, so at the time it made good sense. But yeah, that the MVP race is awesome right now. It's just so compelling.
Yeah, it started with Steph and KD, and now now those two aren't even in the top 3 in most of the MVP rankings. Who's your favorite MVP favorite so far this year?
Yeah, it's going to be either right now, if we're having a straw poll, it'd be either Embiid or Jokic, and you'd probably have to give it to Embiid just because his team is just kind of having a little bit more success, although the Nuggets are kind of keep rolling somehow, right? So it's really tough. And it could come down to, and this is an interesting element with Embiid also, in the past, I think last year I picked Jokic, and one of the reasons was the number of minutes he plays, right? And he affects the games. I think he only missed 1 game last season, and Embiid, that's always been a little bit of an issue with Embiid. So it could come down to something like that, where if Jokic ends up playing 78, 79 games again, and let's hope not, but Embiid, if he runs into some kind of injury issue, which wouldn't be the first time, maybe that could be the difference maker. I think on a very individual, if you look at any kind of the advanced numbers, Jokic is kind of far and away some ways the choice. But you look at how significant Embiid is into a team that's all of a sudden kind of pushing to lead the Eastern Conference. It's hard to deny it. So I don't know. Like, it's a tough call. And I will say this, like, my one thing with Jokic is I think he gets a little bit underappreciated. And I do think that, in 5 years' time, we're going to look at Jokic and we're going to look at Giannis as top 10 players of all time. I think that they're on trajectories that, they're between the three of them. It reminds me of kind of Robinson, Hakeem, and Shaq, kind of in the 80s, 90s. Like they're like, to have three guys this dominant at once is pretty amazing.
What's really amazing is that we've spoken about so many teams and so much basketball, and they're still number one. So many other teams left to discuss, and so many other storylines in this NBA season. It's going to be a wild ride, that's for sure. No matter what happens, no matter who wins the championship, we're going to have a lot of fun watching basketball. And Mike, we want to both thank you so much for joining the show and sharing this with our viewers. This was incredible, this kind of checkpoint to this season. It's such an important time at the trade deadline, going through all these different teams. And who knows, this might look very different in a month, but right now, it's so fun thinking about where the league stands as of right now. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing this with us. Your story was incredible. I as an American, am thankful to know more about Canadian basketball. And overall, we want to make sure we want our listeners to check out notradeclose.com for all their cap sheet, salary cap needs. And really want to thank you for being so supportive of us and what we're doing here. So thank you so much.
You guys do a great job. It was a great interview. Enjoyed every minute of it. So thanks, and happy to join you guys anytime. I'll be on your site a lot this week.
Awesome to hear that. Thanks, Mike.
See you guys.